In this demo, we're going to see how to create an app based on REST services. We'll use two REST service endpoints. The first returns information about a pet in a pet store, passing in the ID of the pet as a parameter. The second returns all of the pets in the store according to their status. In this case, the status is available. So let's build a web interface to work with these two REST service endpoints. I've created a new Visual Builder application and select Service Connections from the Welcome tab, as this will connect to the services. I click here to add a new service connection. I might be selecting services I want in this application from a catalogue that's been provided to me. I might use a specification such as the pet store Swagger specification or another JSON specification that I can use. Or I could just use a specific URL endpoint, which is what I'm going to use for this demo. So you can see that I'm actually using the pet store Swagger sample, but I'm using a particular endpoint from there. And by the way, if you want to work along with this tutorial, I have put the endpoint URLs in the description of this video. This gets the details of one pet in the store via the pet ID. I can choose the method, which will be a get in this case, and this gets 1, so I'll just amend that to 1. In the next screen, Visual Builder has set me up the service, the default service name. Let's just call this Pet Store to make it more meaningful. It's set up the server instance URL. I could add an application profile, but I'll leave that for another tutorial. Any headers that I needed for this server, and I could set up security, authentication, and connection types. But I'm going to leave all of those as the default that Visual Builder has given me. If I go to the Operation tab, I can see that I've got an endpoint ID as provided by the path. I'm going to edit the name to Pet ID. Interesting, I saw that Visual Builder is telling me that I basically need this to be a lowercase p, so we can amend that. Okay, on the Request tab, a path parameter has been set up, so my query parameter here, pet ID of type string, which is required, which is correct. If I go to the Test tab now and add what I know is a valid ID, then I can actually test. If the response is as I'm expecting it to be, then I can save that. The scheme is created, and if I look at the Response tab, I can see the response and the fields that are going to come through. Okay, so that all looks good, so I can finish creating that. So now I have my service pet store, and in that pet store I have one endpoint, the get one endpoint. Let me add another endpoint, which is the pet find by status endpoint as defined by Swagger. Again, let me amend this to find by status with a small f. Go to the request. If I look in the parameters this time, Visual Builder isn't aware that this has to have a query parameter in it, so I'm going to add that manually. The parameter I know is called status, and it's a string, and it is required. Again, if I test that and look at my parameters, here's the parameter I've added. Let's test that with the value available. And yes, it's returned the animals that are available in the store. Again, that's what I was expecting, so I've copied that to my response, and I can add this endpoint. So now I've got one service and two endpoints set up, and I want to use these in my application. So first thing I need to do is to create a new application. I'm going to create a web application. I'll call this Pet Store Console. I'll just take the straightforward navigation style, and here I am now in starting my page design within Visual Builder. I can make changes to my layout, optimize my working space. Okay, so the first thing I'll do is just start my application by adding a heading to the first page. This is the main start page that's been created. We'll call this pets. I can do very simple visual things like amend, and you can notice that the page designer is reflecting immediately what I'm putting in the UI in my main start page. Let's just close some of these other tabs to start here. Okay, so I want to have a list of pets. Let me add a table to have these pets in. Here's the layout of the table, and I can go to my quick start menu and use the add data. So Visual Builder is looking at the objects available to it, and it's noticing that in the pet store endpoint it's got one get many, which was the find by status, which is the one I want to use. If I wanted to amend it, I could go in and manually set it up and set the variables here, but I'll accept what Visual Builder is giving me. And let's just take the name and the status. And notice that although I haven't selected the ID to be in a column in my table, I'm getting that because it's the primary key. Okay. Here's my status parameter, and I'm going to add that same, if I can spell it correctly, that same status here. So I've got a default parameter going through, and finish that. And immediately I've got my list of pets that are available in the store. So that's a good start. What I want to do now is to get the detail on one of these. So again, having selected my table component in the UI, go back to my quick start. Now I'll choose to add a detail page. Visual Builder has provided me with what it thinks is an appropriate service call. So here's my endpoint that takes the one pet ID as a parameter. This time I'll use the name, the status, and the category name. I'll amend the button and just have it called detail and finish that. And let me just run my application in preview mode. Here's my entries, select one, press the detail button, and I got the information. I've got two label hints of name because that was the fields coming through from the endpoint. So I think I want to change that. So I have a number of ways of getting to my page. The easiest is to make sure that I'm in live mode, select an animal, and I can work through the application as if I was running it in preview within the design editor. And now back in design view, I can simply go in and change my label hint. Okay, this is the main detail page. Let me go back to the start page just by selecting it. The last thing I want to do in this demo is to be able to select the status rather than having it defaulting to available. So to do that, what I'd really like is to add a select one. Again, I have a quick start available to me. I'm going to use that. I'm going to create a static list because I know there are three valid options here. So I can finish that. So now I have a UI component that has three static values, but what I haven't done is to bind this UI component to a data variable. So I'm going to create a variable for this, call it status of string. So now my selection will be saved in my variable, but I want to use that variable to call my endpoint. So my endpoint, Visual Builder has created me a variable to hold the data coming back from my service call. So if I go in and edit this variable, I can see that status currently is mapped to the default, but here on my sources I have my variable I've just created that has 3 potential values, and I'm going to map that. So the status variable is now the input. Okay. Here I am on the variable tab of my main start page. If I go back to Page Designer, go into live mode, now when I select, I can see it. And just to check that in my preview, all seems to be working well. And that's how easy it is to add services via endpoint URLs to my application and to use those services in my UI.